All right, thank you, Erik. Can you all hear me correctly? Yep. All right. I'm French. You already know that, so the accents. Sorry about that. You have to bear with me. I'll do my best. All right. So today we are talking about next draft mode and Strapi preview. So the agenda is very quick introduction. Then why do we even talk about draft mode and preview? And finally, building it. So it's mostly a live coding session. I might do a lot of mistakes. Sorry about that. We'll see. So I'm Alex, the CTO at Strapi. I'm from France. I live in the south of France, south of Paris, sorry, like 1 hour away. If you want to reach out, you can reach out on X with that handle. And with that, we can get started. So what do we need? Draft mode and preview. Why do we even care about that? It's a bit of an history lesson. I'll be very short. We have 10 minutes. So you already know what's a CMS and a headless CMS in particular. Yeah, I see head nodding. Cool. So in the past, we were using traditional CMSs. They were managing the admin panel. You were writing your contents, and then you were also rendering the contents in those CMSs directly, which meant that those CMSs could manage the rendering of a draft of the published version of anything that would be in progress work. It was very easy. Everything was in the application, basically. And it was really just a seamless experience for content editors. Nowadays, we love our frameworks, the front-end frameworks. We love using Next and all of those different frameworks on the front end. So we have our own custom front end on one side, and we use the headless CMSs on the other side, like Strapi, which creates a lot of complexity when it comes to the content editing workflows. And that's the main problem I want to discuss. It's creating a seamless content preview system with the modern CMS workflows. Um, yeah, ad banking, definitely. So we have to think as a developer, we have to think about the content editors. You create an application for them, you give them a CMS at the end, the right content, and they are stuck in front of their CMS waiting for the content to update. So how does that happen? When you use something like Next, you have all the static rendering, you have other frameworks that have like static site generation. All of those things make it very difficult to have dynamic content in the UI. And that's why the draft mode in Next was created. It's a way to bypass all the static stuff and just do dynamic rendering. And that's what I'm going to demonstrate today. And I'm going to also give you a sneak preview of the Strapi preview feature that's coming soon for us. All right, so let's build it. You will have to tell me if the code is big enough. All right. Yeah, looks good. Okay, so I'm using the Launchpad, which is our demo app at Strapi. It features a Next application, Next frontend, and a Strapi CMS, obviously. And I'm gonna play with setting up the preview system and a draft mode with Next. So one of the first steps, obviously, is to enable the draft mode in Next. And what we are gonna do is create a root, uh, and it's gonna be, oh, it's already there. Perfect. It's gonna be called preview. And we're just gonna do an export of that root. So basically with Next, you can have a server root and you can set up a draft mode. Draft mode is simply a cookie that will be set up by Next on rendering. So that cookie helps you set up Next and tell Next to actually dismiss all the pre-rendering, all the caching, all of that is just gone, and it's going to fetch the data directly. All right. And obviously, you are in a server request. You need to put a response. All right. So I'm enabling it. It's enable. All right. And return response. Right. Response. All right. Okay. So that will be the first step is, okay, I have a root and I'm going to call it like that. I'm going to say, okay, I'm fetching my next app and a preview. All right. Okay. I'm a hello world. It's kind of useless right now. And what you can see here is that you have a cookie set up for you by Next. That's cool. And now I want to actually use it, make it something useful. So what I'm going to do is actually not just send a response, but redirect to the application so that I'm rendering my page.
Oops, we lost your video.
technical issues. So maybe it's the issue.
Disconnect. Yes. I just so best things. I was about that.
Okay, we are back. All right. That's good. All right. So
Yep.
I'm going to redirect somewhere. And right now I'm just going to redirect to my page.
Yes.
Just, yeah. All right. Going back to my website, API preview. All right. I'm back to my website and I see my website. Here you don't see that it's draft mode or anything like that. It's kind of seems useless. And now what's interesting is starting to set it up with the connection to the Strapi draft system. Okay, I'm back on my page. Now I want to actually visualize something that's a draft mode. So I'm going to kind of spare you the details and I'm going to go in our fetching method. And in our fetching method, we are going to add a parameter for Strapi to know that because it's a draft mode, I have to fetch the draft contents. So, all right. All right. So if it's enabled, then we're going to do status must be a drafts. Right. Cool. And no, very fast. I see nothing. That's it. And it's because, well, I still have the same data on my Strapi UI. So I'm going to go in my Strapi dashboard. I'm going to go in my home page. It's a bit small. And I'm going to say that in draft, I want to go into space instead. And save there. All right. And no, because I'm on draft mode, I can see that I'm in space. So here, what Next is doing is just bypassing all the pre-rendering stuff. So it's in the dev mode, but if you were to build your next app, which is what's really important, you have to imagine you are in production, you've built your next application, you have pre-rendered all of your pages, they are static, it's all deployed, and then you are stuck with all the pre-rendering stuff. And with that draft mode, you can actually say Next, well, just go to the server, render something dynamically and return the page instead of serving the pre-rendered stuff. All right, so that's cool. Now I want to actually see that I'm in draft mode and maybe exit. So that's what we're going to add here. We are going to just go in my components there, and we're going to create a simple banner. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy paste it from another file. Such a nobody saw that. All right, because otherwise it's going to take very long. And you will see that in that file, I'm basically just displaying a banner, but I'm going to fetch a API that's called exit preview. And that's the one we're going to build. All right. And this one can be really straightforward. And what we really want to say is draft mode. Thank you for the autocomplete disable. And I'm going to return an empty response. It doesn't really matter. I can return hello world. It's fine. And now I'm going to actually show that banner somewhere. And the way you can show it only in draft, which is what you really want to do, is also check the draft mode in your page. So here I'm in my page layout, draft mode, right, is enabled. I'm going to put it here. It's going to be draft error, right? And I want to say, voila. Hey. All right, so you just have your banner, you know that you're in draft mode. I want to exit my draft mode, and I see the data. What's very nice, maybe you didn't see that part. Here, we just fetch the exit, so it's going to delete the cookie, and we use a very neat feature in Next, which is the router refresh. And Next basically is going to refresh all the data fetching, call the server to ask for a fresh page, but it's going to also maintain all the React client-side states. So you don't lose the scrolling, you don't lose all the interactivity you already were setting up. So it gives you like a kind of dynamic refresh instead of a page reload, so much more efficient. All right. So you've got all your setup on that side. It's pretty neat. And now we're just going to have a bit more fun and we are going to set up a real-time update instead of just visualization. And before that, I'm going to even do something better because it's very annoying to actually have to go to /API/preview. I'm going to add the feature in Strapi so you can have a preview button. So it's a feature that is on preview at the moment. So actually enable it and you can play with it. It's already live. You just need to enable the feature. Right now it's an experimental version, but it's going to be soon in the latest version. So I'm going to restart. And now I have my open preview. So that's the basic stuff. You click on the link and it redirects you to where you're supposed to be. And it all does the redirection very cleanly. You get your draft mode view very easily. So as a content editor, you will see that the workflow is already much better. You can very quickly see, okay, I've made some modification, I've saved my draft, and I can see what's happening. All right. So now I talked about doing some real-time stuff. Do you know server sent events? Is it something you've heard of?
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. So we're gonna play a bit with this one. And I have a component already created. That's cool. Event, I think that I wasn't really inspired by the name. Let me find it. Events. And this one is just doing a little interesting thing, which is basically listening to a route on Strapi, and that route is sending messages. I'm doing very basic logic here. I'm just receiving events and saying, okay, I should refresh. Here you would actually implement, am I in the right place to refresh the stuff I'm doing? But the main idea is, okay, I'm going to listen to events that I'm subscribed to and then react and do something. So this is the client part. So same as the draft banner, you actually want to only render that when you are in draft mode. You don't want to start adding something subscribing every time someone is rendering your website. That should be only in draft mode. So that's that. And on the Strapi side, you can really play. So that's one of our main advantages is you can play with custom routes in Strapi. So I've built up a very simple endpoint that's keeping alive the connection. And that's going to be streaming events based on events that happen inside Strapi. So I'm sending all the events, like when someone is creating an entry, updating an entry, deleting them. So you can really react to whatever you want. Bear in mind, I'm not managing any security here. So don't copy paste that code directly in production. You'll have to handle that on your own, but that's the main idea. So everything is set up, everything has restarted. And now it's the big demo effect. We'll see that very soon, hopefully. And I'm going to say that I want to go back to Orbit, actually. And I'm going to save. And tada, real-time updates. And this is really the neat thing is you can start building your own real-time version of the draft mode for Next, and your end users are going to really have a much better experience. And you can imagine that you even do that like for some specific use cases directly in production if you want like some very fresh data in some cases. All right, I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to stop there. Thank you, everyone. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. Do we do the Q&A directly? All right. Thank you. Who's managing the mic?
Yeah. Any questions for Alex?
Does anything change with what you're doing with any of the, like, Next.js 15, for example? Like, what version of Next we're using for that, and has anything changed?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Yeah.
So this demo is done on Next 14. I haven't showed some of the interesting features about revalidating the data in production. So right now it's just a draft mode. you're switching to draft mode and you get the refresh data. One annoying part is also when you do static rendering is when you actually publish your content and you want to get that new content live in production, you might just have to restart a new pipeline, redeploy, rebuild the entire application with static site generation. Is kind of annoying. And Next actually have a revalidate pass, revalidate tag feature that can enable a live revalidation of content. So you could set up what I did for previews, but also for revalidating content on publication. And one caveat and one big change between 14 and 15 is the caching method and the caching default in Next. In 13 and 14, the fetch methods were cached by default. That created a lot of trouble for people. And in 15, they reverted that change. So now the caching is actually disabled by default. So that's one thing that would be impacted here.
I think we have time for one more question. Could you repeat the question after it's been asked? Thank you.
So the event connection to me seems like it's a webhook kind of situation, and it looks like it was handled on the front end with a use effect, right?
Yeah.
Is there a way to do that with server streaming?
All right. So I'm going to repeat the question. So the real-time example that I showed was using a use effect in the front end and was streaming events, quite similar to webhooks. And can we do that with server sides? Yeah. So actually, the way it's implemented right now is on the Strapi side, there is an endpoint, and the front end with the use effect is creating a connection, and it's a stream connection, actually. So we already do the streaming. It's just that we do it from the Strapi server to the Next front. But you could also, if you want, and for security reason, you might actually do that, is do a proxying system. So you actually listen to the Next. You can stream from a Next endpoint and then listen in the Next backend to Strapi. So I had that set up first, but it was a bit too much.
A follow-up to that, so if you did do that and you have to deploy it on Vercel where it's a serverless function, wouldn't you have problems with like trying to keep the connection open forever?
So actually, yeah, exactly. So pricing issues maybe, but with Next, you have an option. You can set the functions themselves as force dynamic. There is an option. So you kind of tell Next, well, let this run kind of forever. So as long as the connection is open, Next and Vercel in particular is that Next will actually leave it open. So you can make it work.
Can you repeat what the question was?
Yeah, sorry. The question was in relation to Vercel, when you deploy Next, you deploy server functions. Leaving connection open is not really something you do with serverless, but Vercel and Next, there is an option which is called force dynamic. You can set up the Next routes to actually leave connections open.
Awesome. Big round of applause for Alex.
So we're at what, 6:29, so we'll say 6:30. Can someone in the front row just give me a call out at like 6:40? Will you do that? Thank you. But be really obnoxious about it. It helps like distract me from everything. Yes, thank you. Next.js Conf, this is like super cool for me. I wanted to come to Next.js Conf for a couple of years. I'm super excited to be here, super excited to be at a meetup, hang out with all of you. And I don't know, there's like so many parties and stuff going on. We'll see how it goes. But my name is, I don't know if this is going to work. Maybe not. That one. We'll do that. So my name is James Q. Quick, and I consider myself to be three things that I've done professionally for about 10 years now. A developer, a speaker, and a teacher. And for the last couple of years, I've actually been doing this for myself, working on my own, creating content, doing consulting, speaking, and that sort of stuff. And as of 3 weeks ago, which is kind of crazy, I joined the team at MakeSwift as the head of developer experience. This is where you applaud. Thank you. Yep. And MakeSwift, almost exactly a year ago, was acquired by a company called BigCommerce. Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So I don't know if you joined a company recently, but when you join a company, especially one like the one I did, it's like drinking from a fire hose. And not only is it drinking from a fire hose, my team decided it would be a good idea to throw me up in front of the audience to talk about something, a journey that they've been on for the past year and a half, 2 years, and for me to be the one to talk about that. So thank you for putting me in that spot to do it. So what I joined was basically a modernization effort for BigCommerce. And what BigCommerce wants to do is kind of change the way that they recommend and help customers build products and e-commerce platforms. And so there's several requirements, things that they were looking to do. They wanted a new visual builder. That's actually what MakeSwift is and how that fits in. They wanted to have themes that could swap, that you could swap between. They wanted to incorporate modern best practices, and they wanted it to be composable. And composable is one of these words that gets thrown around over and over again. And maybe for the context of like the audience that we have here, composable means you can integrate other services that you want as a developer, whether it be Neon, Mux, Strapi, Inngest. Did I get them all? Yeah. So what they came up with was a project called Catalyst. And Catalyst is basically reference architecture for building e-commerce sites, platforms that integrates with BigCommerce and also is built on top of Next.js. So the composability is there where you can integrate anything that you want to with Next.js. And with that, they wanted to solve the problem of theming as well. And so on top of the theming, our goals with theming, they wanted to create something that was open source, have copy and paste components, something similar to ShadCN, have defined but minimal props, we'll talk about that more in a second, and be completely decoupled from backend services. Again, going back to composability and flexibility. And that's where we came up with Vibes. And this is QR code, it's vibes.site if you want to check it out. But it's a modern UI library for composable sites. And so like ShadCN, you have things like primitives, things like buttons and cards and that sort of stuff. You'll also see, if we kind of zoomed in on a list, you'll see that some of these components are more specific to e-commerce. So this is like specifically kind of targeting e-commerce use case, so you'll see some components there that are specific to that. But the scary thing is, the really dangerous thing is that not only do we have these primitive components, we also want to have really opinionated composed sections of these primitive components. And what does that mean? We want to standardize these props for these sections. So if we're building like a cart section, we want to standardize these props so that we can integrate with any other like data service that we want, have the standard interface. We want to have those interfaces have minimal data, so you're not building things specific to a certain platform. You're building something generic and minimal as possible, and want to take advantages of best practices, and specifically to be tightly integrated with Next.js and server components and streaming and all the things that come along with that. And the scary thing is, most people talk about the complete separation of design system from your code and your logic, and that is very true. And so creating this thing that can be reused, that can be swappable in terms of themes, that integrates with Next.js is a challenge that we've been working through, which has been a lot of fun. And we've come up with these patterns to build this out that integrate with Next.js that are pretty interesting. So let's take a look at some code. We have this section here. And we might kind of start by defining some interfaces of props that we'll take. The main thing is, these are a little simplified, but the main thing is we'll take like an array of line items, things that are going to be displayed in our cart. Well, if you just gave that to somebody to use, they would probably go and query that inside of their page component and then pass that data down into the cart, and hey, it'll render. And that takes advantage of server components. So server components by default, you have async queries that you can run right there. But let's say you want to have your loading state. And what I learned when I first started working with server components a year or so ago was you don't get that by default. You have to do a little bit of work. And there's some stuff that's built into Next.js to support that. But what you would probably do is end up creating kind of your own additional component. So in this case, I have my cart. And then inside of the page component, I'm going to wrap that with suspense so that I can have a div with a loading text that displays while that data is being loaded. So that's fine. It's not really great because we need to get to the point where we can kind of abstract away the like, how do we get the data, and have that be something that can be passed in that we can use. So in this case, maybe we update the interface to accept a property called getLineItems, which is a function maybe that can go and query the data. But server components and client components trying to pass that function back and forth is not going to work. It's not going to be serializable. So how do we then take like the ability to query to get data, to not have that be embedded in the component itself, but be embedded in a way that can actually resolve data and not have to have that be tightly coupled to what's there? So what we decided on, and I think this is really neat, is for line items, as an example, you can pass either an array of line items or a promise that resolves to an array of line items. So with that, inside of here, and this is actually what becomes like the source code in Vibes, is you have, you await the promise. If you're on the server, you can await promise.resolve of that promise that comes in. And whether or not it's a promise or just the regular data, you will get that data as resolved and you can pass that to your cart. Actually, there's a typo in there if you can see it, but anyway. But if you're additionally doing this on the client, you can also pass a promise and use the new use hook from React to be able to resolve that data on the client as well. So 2 different use cases, whether you're running that part specifically on the client or the server, you can accept either the data and or a promise of that data and still be able to resolve that and render it appropriately. So another thing inside of this section that you might notice, we have like the kind of counter thing where we can increment and decrement line items. And for this, we can use server actions. And this code is simplified to kind of condense the screenshot, to be quite honest. But we can pass an action to a form that wraps each one of these buttons. And then inside of that button, it can manage its own loading or pending state, and it can display that and be able to run the code from the action. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting, though, is what if you wanted to take your checkout button and you wanted to disable that while you were loading, being able to add or delete an item there? So another thing that that you could do is actually wrap all of that in a form. You could pass an action to each one of those. Inside of each one of those buttons, they would still have access to the loading state of the parent form, which could have been triggered from either one of those buttons. So in this case, if we had the checkout button inside of here as well, it could then detect the state that was triggered by hitting the increment or decrement button and disable that checkout button while that process is happening. So there's lots of other things that I think are really, really cool that I won't have time to talk about in like the 10, 15 minutes. We'll take a couple questions, which is a dangerous situation to put myself in. But there's kind of the idea of server-driven state and doing that inside of the URL, like with search params. That's been something that's been really interesting. This is an example, like on the filtering section here, if you click some of these buttons to filter, if you change the rating, that will actually trigger clear params that will then do a client-side refresh of the data, doing a full round trip to the server that doesn't actually look like it does, which is pretty neat the way it does it on the client. New updates to form components and progressive enhancement and caching. There's lots of stuff that are really, really cool on what we've done. One of the things I think that is most important, and curious to see if we get any updates on this tomorrow, is looking at PPR, or partial pre-rendering. How many people are using PPR now? Aware of what PPR is? So the big downside to server components at this point is when you leverage a server component outside of caching, so caching aside, when you leverage the server component, you're basically opting into the entire route being driven from the server. What PPR allows you to do is pick out individual pieces of that route and say, these things are going to be dynamic, that can use server components, that can use streaming, can use suspense, while the shell of that entire page is actually static and served from a CDN. So the difference between getting that initial request response from a CDN versus the actual server, and then being able to stream in a dynamic part. So all the stuff that we're doing with server components and suspense, when, I mean, I guess enabled now, you can do PPR, but like when that's stable, all of that stuff will just work with PPR, and all that static stuff can just be displayed or deployed to a CDN. So takeaway, if you're interested in learning any more about this and the stuff that we're working on at vibes.site, you can check it out at the bottom. There's a newsletter. So we'll send updates on what we're working on. I think some of the stuff that I would like to do is create content around like the best practices that we've put together, how to build certain sections, how to build these things in Next.js. And we'll have an initial launch in a couple weeks. We'll have more vibes coming soon, and we'll have more patterns that we'll be super excited to tell everyone about as well. So I have a couple minutes for questions, but thank you.
I was really hoping to have some like big obnoxious, hey, your time's up.
What time was that?
You were exactly
Right at 10? Okay.
Exactly
Cool.
Anybody have any questions for James?
Awkward. Yeah?
So for the form component, I'm not too familiar with it. Like under the hood, is that like using context to pass the loading state through, or how does that work to like get the loading state through all the components inside of it. Like if you're waiting on loading to increment the button to like change the state of a different like thing.
Yeah, that I'm actually not sure about. Yeah, and I just told myself to repeat. So the question is, when we looked at accessing the stat that is pending property of the form inside of a nested button, how does it actually get that? That I actually haven't dug into. We probably have almost certainly someone that can answer on the side, but I haven't looked at that underneath the hood myself. But if we want to have a separate conversation in a minute, I'm sure we can get down to it. Good question though.
Any other questions? Oh, yep. You got a mic too?
Yeah, I got a mic here.
Ready.
Does this depend on you hosting your Next.js app on Vercel, or is it kind of agnostic of that? Because there are things that Next.js on Vercel.
Yeah, I'll remember this time. Repeat the question. Yeah. The question is all of this stuff or any of this stuff specifically dependent upon Vercel? Matt from Netlify, I'm sure, would love to answer this question. Actually talked to him yesterday, and they have complete feature parity for Next.js 15 already available in Netlify, right? Okay. So yeah, I know the answer to. Matt's here. He can talk more to that as well. I don't know specifically about Cloudflare, other options, but there is the Open Next. I don't know, like working group. I don't know what you call it, but like basically platforms trying to figure out how to implement all the primitives that Vercel supports for Next.js.
You got time for one more question?
More on the front.
Okay, so can you go to the cards portion? What
Part code,
Hey.
any particular part?
is that?
Yeah.
So this
Feels like it's kind of like coupling like the response API shape with the components. I guess how are you thinking about extensibility, managing things like that?
Accessibility, extensibility. So the question is, how are you managing extensibility? Thank you. Or thinking about extensibility specifically when, in this case, we're expecting a promise to resolve in a certain way, in a certain format. And I think that's why we're defining these interfaces for these sections so that they can be reused whatever the data is, wherever it comes from. And what's going to happen is there will be some sort of translation layer, like the data that you have that comes out of your headless CMS, whatever it is, Strapi. You have to take that and format it in the way that meets the interface that we're defining for these sections. The benefit of that is like you can swap out whatever you're using. You can don't drop Strapi, sorry. You could use something else if you wanted to. And as long as you have that layer that's going to do that translation for you to match this interface, then you're going to be able to keep and reuse these same components. The other thing, I don't know if I specifically said like hot swappable, but the idea of like you can have a vibe and then hot swap that out for another vibe because you're still respecting that same interface. And we will have different interfaces for different categories of vibes. So e-commerce is what I kind of talked about here. So that will be a specific interface, and then different interfaces for other categories. And again, as long as you're within the same category, matching that same interface, you'll be able to swap those out.
huge. They're also copy paste. So the question about this and spell it with it.
Yeah. So yeah, another point. These are copy and paste like ShadCN. So you have full control over the source code as well. So you can go and do whatever you want. Obviously, if you go and change the interfaces after you get them, then the swappability stuff may not make as much sense, but it's yours to do what you want to fit your use case. Yep. Cool.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone. I'm here to talk about the migration from Strapi 4 to Strapi 5 for plugin development. This one's going to be a little bit less on the coding side. It's going to be a little bit more talking about the plugin and a little bit more talking about what Mux is, so you can kind of get an understanding like what our journey looked like in this migration. Start off, I'm Erik Peña. I'm a solutions architect here at Mux. I've been with the company for about 4 years. I'm actually based in Seattle, Washington, but I'm down here quite frequently. So yeah, if you catch me on the street, stop me and say hi. To kind of step into it, to give you a little bit of background context about what it is this plugin does, I have to first tell you a little bit more about Mux, about what it does. Mux, we have a couple of major products that we offer. Primarily, I'm going to focus on the video side of things, since this is what our plugin is integrated with. for our services, we essentially have the video pipeline that you could use to not only ingest the content, but also deliver from it. Our APIs are award-winning. You can look at our documentation. It's published online. It's very easy. We get various compliments, not only from customers, but from the community, as far as the ease of being able to read it, understand it, and then just the ease of also using our APIs as well. But just to kind of give you an idea of like what this pipeline looks like, whether you're using like BOD assets or you're doing live streams, as far as your platform goes, you would essentially point that over to Mux. Mux does all the heavy lifting of taking video, encoding it, storing it, delivering it. We also have players that you can just pull off the shelf, customize it, and then have it delivered. We also have a data product. I'm not going to get too much into it, but essentially what that is it gives you the observability into the quality of experience of your video playback across all your clients. Definitely take a look at what it is. But again, as far as the plugin goes, the plugin is going to be integrated with our video side of things. It's going to be integrated inside of Strapi. Gives you the ability of uploading videos directly within the Strapi admin UI. You can manage it. You can tie it to different types of collection types within Strapi. You can extend it. You can leverage some of the features that we have as part of our core API feature sets, which are listed out here on the side. I don't know if you can see my mouse. Yeah, you can see my mouse. It's available on GitHub. You can see the code. You can take a look at it. It's all really clean stuff. I built it myself. But generally, for customers that are using us, we've had various types of customers, whether it's an LMS, if you're doing educational content, if you're just trying to throw a video up on your website. We have all types of customers using this plugin to drive video within their product. So let's talk a little bit about the migration process. Primarily, let's talk about the learnings that I've had and the takeaways. I call them the trials and tribulations. As far as the timeline goes, we started in earnest on this migration in August. And I remember this because I was in Las Vegas at the time. I met up with a couple of the Strapi team who are based in Las Vegas. Well, one of them is, and the other one had flown out from Texas. We got together, did a little mini hackathon, went through just basically the initial, like just starting the actual migration. Nothing worked. That was primarily because of a couple of different things that I will cover here in a second. But essentially, we walked away with at least seeing the code starting to take shape. We went into the phase that I call the muck. And the muck is basically where everything's just kind of thrown up because everything has just kind of changed. And this was partially because of some changes with the Strapi APIs, but also a large part with how the plugin was structured to begin with, aka my fault. So after some time, worked with the Strapi team, we've identified some bugs. We went through some iterations of just kind of updating the release candidates on Strapi, going through testing things. The Strapi team was amazing and actually smashing these bugs with me. After that was done, we were able to finally get it launched. It worked. It looked horrible, primarily because some of the things with the design system had changed, and we'd also found out that there were some things that we had done that were counterintuitive to how the design system worked. So we went through a polishing phase where we just basically fine-tuned everything. And then we published it on October 18th, which was last Friday. So that's out there now, and it's on 5. Thank you. But yeah, along the way, like I mentioned, a couple of Strapi guys that were particularly helpful in this entire process. Derek Mahaffey and Paul Bretslav. I can't say his last name. He'll be the first person to say that. Just don't even say my last name. Breslavsky. I hope that's right. Those two in particular, those were the guys that joined me on the hackathon. And yeah, we went through it, and then we had drinks afterwards, and it was a great time. So let's talk a little bit about the things that went well. So design system maturity. This is the design system. If you're familiar with Strapi, they have their own design system. This is how their UIs are built. I have been able to see how it has progressed over time. When I had started building this plugin, this was back in Strapi version 2. To give you context, and we're now on 5. So I have been able to see it progress over time. And so being able to work with a design system where everything just kind of makes sense goes a long way. The community is outstanding. Whether you're on Discord or you're on the forums or you're just in the office hours, it's great to have the ability of being able to kind of talk with the community and get ideas and of what best approaches are for different types of things. Transparency and implementation. So whether it's going to be through Strapi plugin references, if you're familiar with their repo, you know that all their plugins that they have that they build are inside of a subdirectory, a packages subdirectory. They're there, and you can go in there and you can take a look and see how they did it. They also have a design system repo along with documentation. Great. And they also have third-party packages. That's usually like my last resort. If I'm trying to do something very specific, I'll start looking at what other people have done. And again, goes back to community. The things I've learned along the way. So earlier when I mentioned that things were a bit of a muck because of things that I had done, well, this was because I wasn't sticking to conventions. And if you've done coding long enough, there are particular ways that you do things when you're in different frameworks or different platforms. You have to stick to the conventions, because the second you start straying away, then it just starts running away from you. So this was the part of that muck was basically resetting like how we did project structure for the plugin. Everything's much cleaner now. Stay with the latest. So whether it's going to be updating the packages, doing keeping up to date with the plugin build configurations, or just generally the project structure. Just staying on top of it, even on like minor and patch builds. Like you want to make sure that those are updated. And then a friend indeed. So if you are doing plugin development, engage on Discord. The Strapi team is very responsive. You can attend their office hours. I'm generally in them. We do a lot of talking about tech. We'll talk about Strapi. We'll talk about how Derek's hatred for TypeScript. We're always razzing him. But it's great. It's great. So let's do a little bit of a demo. For this, I had actually built something. It's built on Next.js. It's obviously using Mux for video. And it's also using Strapi to drive the actual CMS. So this was something I had thrown together pretty quickly. But you can see here, it's just a standard page. It obviously has video. That's what's driving all of this. And the CMS for Strapi, obviously, is going to be driving a lot of the metadata. Yeah, there's not much to say here other than that all these elements that you're seeing with video, that's driven by us. You'll see that there's a player here. That's our Mux player. Makes it really easy to get stood up and actually play back video. These animated GIFs are also coming from, or GIFs, are coming from Mux as well. And it's all formatted URL. So the second that you get what we call a playback ID, that's what you get that's deliverable to the client. You can plug that in for the video. You can use that same value to actually plug it into animated GIFs, or thumbnails. And it'll all just load. Opening it up, you'll get a video. I hope I muted this. Probably didn't. We'll stop it. It's playing. You'll still have to trust me on that. Yeah, and to kind of take a look at like how this is structured on the Strapi side. I can show you what the content manager looks like. So I have a couple different elements here, collection types. I have the carousel. You'll see that there is the Mux asset. This is ships with the plugin. These are where all the videos are stored. This is not something typically you would modify, but it's for reference. The carousel itself, you can see that I have 3, and those are the 3 that are showing on the front here. For each of these, I have components. These components are what the individual videos, that's what's driving the carousels in this case. If I go into the popular picks, I can add another one. Actually, this is Men in Black. I think it's 2. Just like a short little clip that I found online. A cool video. So yeah. Actually, before that, we wanted to actually do an upload. So let me actually show you the plugin real quick before we jump into this. So this is the plugin itself. This is the UI that we have. You can see all the videos that I have on the front that I built is here. If I upload a new video, we get a dialog. You can do this a couple different ways. You can either do it through a file that's local on your machine, or if you have a URL for a remote location, you could define that as well. For this, I'll do Men in Black 2, choose file, 4, open. We get some settings here. I'm not going to mess with them just because, for demo purposes, really don't need to get too much into it. We do have the ability of setting auto captions, which basically it'll look at the video, and we use Whisper AI to essentially build the different caption files for a set of languages that you see here. If you have an SRT or VTT file for the captions, you can also upload it. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. This is going to upload it. It's a small file, so it's really fast. Hit finish. Now, what I'm going to do is you'll see here that here's the video. Instantaneous. It's awesome. Now we can go to the content manager. We're going to go into the popular picks, add a new entry. Men in Black 2. Cool video. Right. Black 2. There we are. Let's publish it. So now, if I go back to the front here and I hit refresh, there it is. It's ready to go. And it's instantly ready for playback. All right, no audio. Thank you. All right. Just a couple of things I also want to mention. So you saw the demo, you saw the plugin. It works great. We also have a couple programs to help just different cohorts or different communities of people to get started with video on their projects. The first one here is powered by Mux. This is going to be primarily targeted more for like the video creators for developers, or if you're building like a educational documentation for your site and you want to use video. We actually will provide you credits. If you follow the conditions and if you scan the QR code, this will take you to the page that we have on our site. Read more details about it. Feel more than welcome to sign up for it, or even talk to me after this chat. The second program is going to be video infrastructure for startups. So this one's going to be a little bit more generic. It's going to be more on the startup side of things. Again, you get credits if you are a startup and you're looking to add video to your products. It doesn't have to be a website. It could be native apps even. You can use this the credits that we provide you to get started. Another QR code. Great. Q&A.
Any questions for Erik?
Not very technically relevant, but why is Big Buck Bunny always the demo for video streaming? Have you noticed that? Like when I was at Microsoft 10 years ago, it was the same thing. Why is that the example?
That's a wonderful question. The question was, why is Big Buck Bunny always the video that people use on whenever they're demoing? Well, it's open source, and so you have a license to just play it, and so you're going to see it everywhere. Truthfully, I'm tired of seeing it. It's a 10-minute video, and when you're in a booth and you have this thing on repeat, it gets old quick. There are a lot of other videos out there that are also open source that you can use. I just pulled Big Buck Bunny. Sorry.
Yeah, just the GIFs that are they generated by Mux, and can you control what shows up in those GIFs?
That's a wonderful question. The question was, were the animated GIFs driven by Mux, and can you control what's actually shown? The answer is yes and yes. So using that formatted URL I was talking about, using the playback ID that you would get for the video, you would use that same playback ID in a formatted URL to get the animated GIF. But you also get query parameters that you can also define as well. And it controls things like the size, the dimensions of the image, the frame rate, the start time, end time, all those different attributes you can control. And you kind of tailor what the animated image looks like. You can also do very similar things for just thumbnail images as well. You can specify the time point in which you want to actually create the thumbnail. And so if you're not happy with the auto selected value that we have, you can actually tune to find the exact frame that you want to actually pull for the thumbnail.
Could you pick out a few of your favorite features from Mux and Strapi and see how they talk about how they complemented each other over time? Since I think you've been doing it since Strapi 2 years.
Yeah. The question was, could I pick out a couple different features? Was it between Mux and Strapi? And what? Oops.
What are this thing?
Yeah. Shouldn't have touched that. Oh well, it's done anyways. And how I can you repeat that last part again?
Let's see how they complement each other.
Yep. So yeah, that's a good question. Essentially, because we focus more on the video side, Strapi focuses more on the content management side of things. we are not really in the business of kind of adding that content management. And so being able to have the content management system where you can build these really complex collection types and entities, but then also add the video at any point of those entities, it just really kind of sealed the deal of like, okay, you can add video and have it in any kind of shape or form that you need for your platform. I think that helped out. And there was like obviously a delineation between like what the content was versus what the actual video is. And things like you have like the quality, the video quality. You can control the access of the videos. Obviously images can be kind of between both. You can use the thumbnails from Mux, or you can also have, you may have noticed like there was the big buck bunny, like the little bunny kind of image popped up. That's actually was part of the Strapi, the Strapi instance I had as just an image that I uploaded directly to Strapi. And so you don't have to use all of Mux's images to be able to drive your platform. If you have custom posters or custom, just anything like other collateral that you want to add, you would use Strapi in that particular sense.
Awesome. Thank you, Erik.
Thank you.
I had a little intro about my first name. Actually, everybody gets it wrong, but that's fine. That's totally fine. So it's part of being a DevRel. Actually, I like to travel around the world and be in meetups and meet developers like yourselves. And one thing is my name changes depending on where I go. In France, it's Raouf, and it just sounds so good. Oh my God, I want them to say it over and over again. And in America, it's anywhere from Raul to Ralph, depending on which Starbucks I go to. But yeah, so this is a little segue here. But yeah, I'm Raouf. I'm a developer advocate at Neon, and as a developer advocate, I like to meet developers, and I like also to give talks. And one way to get better at these talks is actually by getting feedback from the audience. So this is exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to build a little application for you to give me feedback on how well this talk is. And I love over engineering things. So instead of giving you a type form or a Google form, we're going to build it from scratch. And I'm sure that many of you would build it in 5 minutes, but we're going to do it in 15 minutes using AI, just because it sounds cooler. And I haven't heard the word AI for the first time in like maybe 12 months. So I'm a bit surprised. So yeah, tonight is no exception, guys. I'm sorry. All right. So, and when you build when you build UI, you build components, then you have to go through V0. And the reason I use V0 is not only because it got so good at creating Next.js components, but I kind of am not good at front end. So that's why I'm just gonna run this. And my prompt is quite simple. I'm asking it to build a component for me with a name and a star rating scale, and that's it. So let's run this. And in the meantime, we're gonna go. I don't have any slides, so I'm just gonna start creating the app. All right, so we're going to create a next application. We're gonna call it feedback. And all right, we're just gonna go with the default settings all the way. Yeah, just let's save time. And one thing that I want to do to get things out of the way, let's just deploy it to Vercel. Oh, oops. Yeah, I need to move to the right directory. Let's deploy it to Vercel. Okay, let's do that. I don't know what you're asking me, but I'm gonna go enter all the way. Okay, cool. And in the meantime, I'm sure that my component is ready. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy this chatcn command and open a new terminal. Let me move to the right directory again. And if you've done this before, so you know what's gonna happen, it's gonna just install my my component that we just created. And by the way, the component looks pretty good. I really like the looks of it. And there we go. It's gonna take a second, and then we can run the app. Let's copy this. I feel like it's always a setup when the mic is right in front of my face. But And we're not going to see the component, obviously, because we need to change this little page here. But let me go to the component to see what the name of it is. Feedback form component. It's pretty good. And we're going to go to the page.tsx file. We're going to remove all of this and just add the components. Cool. Okay. So now I need to kind of import it, and let's remove image because we don't need it. Ta-da! Okay, cool. So now I have a component, but this component is kind of useless because it's not connected to a database. And I work for Neon, and we do databases. We have we have Postgres offering in the cloud. So I could create a new Postgres database and then connect it and then have an API route. But I thought that for the sake of over-engineering things, I created a CLI that does all of that for me. So let's go ahead and actually run that CLI. Let me just copy the shatcn command that we used before. And I called the CLI full zero. So lack of creativity. It's turning V0 components into full stack components. So, or like dynamic components. And what it does is it executes first the CLI command that I gave it. So it executes the npx shatcn add the component. So here I'm just gonna go no because we don't need to override the existing files. But what it's asking me here to do is to create a new database. I'm gonna just say yes, and it's gonna do that on Neon right away. Okay, so I don't need this anymore. It's gonna do that on Neon right away. So I can go here and I go to my tables, and I don't have anything for, at the moment. But what it's doing, it's actually taking the component, looking at its structure, and I can show you the code of the CLI too. So it could be more interesting to go and have a look at it here. Okay. So I created the CLI using Bombshell, and overall the experience was quite smooth. It was the first time that I used it, except when you use quiet. For some reason, it exits the command. But apart from that, the experience was quite smooth. And I'm gonna go and have a look at this identify dynamic element. And the first thing that I ask it to do is to describe the React component. And somehow when I ask it to do this, it does a much pretty good job. And by it, I mean the LLM. It does a pretty good job at generating and refactoring the code. And what I ask it as a first step is just generate the data model, the refactored React component, the API route logic, and the data fetching logic. And it should have completed the task by now. So we can have a look at the files that it has generated. Or maybe not. Nope, doesn't yet. Let's give it a minute. Should be faster than this. But it's refactoring the component in the moment. All right, awkward silence. Do you have any questions so far? Okay, so, and what it does also, it generates a schema using Drizzle, and then it creates the API route. But here I can already show you, yay. Okay, I can already show you that I get a database with in the .env file, and if I open this folder, I got my route here. So I created the API/feedback routes.ts, and I get so I get this API that I can get started with. And if I go to my components and I look at the component that I installed before, I can see that there is an error. Okay. So what about just remove this or follow cursor? Okay. Do nothing. Okay. So, and I can see that what it basically does is it added this part of the code where I call the API. And the next step is going to be to generating the schema. Is in Drizzle, so I'm just gonna run that that command. And if I refresh this page, the table space in my database, I should see something. Okay. This is how I know it's live. When it doesn't work, okay, so something happened maybe. Hold on. It didn't like what happened in the schema. Okay, something wrong in the schema. There you go. Check rating. What about just do this? What about now? Yay. Cool. Yeah, it's one of the learnings using LLMs to generate code. They're not that good. But I'll tell you about it later on. Yay. Okay, so now I generate the schema and I can just run dev. Oh, it was already running. So let's just go here, refresh. Nope. Right. Yep. And let's do a test. Give it a rating of 1. Not that good. Submit feedback. Refresh. Yay. Okay, cool. Let's do. Thank you. Not over yet. Okay, we got to deploy this. Let's deploy it for a second. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to add the env, so database URL. Let's copy it from the .env file. Or like this. Let's add it. Yes, production. And then Vercel is prod. Okay, because I'm reading that feedback from you guys. Okay, so I can go and follow the build process here. So, and let's talk a little bit about the learning, or we can take questions also, because this is going to take 1 minute. Any questions? Yes.
Is full zero live on GitHub or anything? Or?
Yes, I can share the I can share the repo. Yes. Yes. Is full zero on GitHub? I can share the repo later. Yeah. Other question? Yes.
How long did it take you to build full zero?
Can you repeat the question?
I haven't answered yet. Wait. Okay. So how long did it take me to build full zero? It took me about half a day to build it, about 3 days to debug it, about like another 2 days to find like the right combination. And yeah, it's always tricky when you're doing things with LLMs. Okay, so here I know what happened. It didn't build because of length and because it didn't like some things in feedback form. And we're gonna make this happen. So do we still have time, by the way? Okay, yeah, we're gonna make this happen for sure. Yes, it didn't like the error. Error is not defined. I never used. Yes, the one that I deleted earlier.
Catalog.
Or just delete more of it.
Yeah, I like add analog. Yeah. Ta-da. Okay, so what's the other one? And that's definitely on V0. They create this problem here. Okay, not me. This one, yeah. Okay.
This was brightest on the fast.
It works. Okay, let's try it again. Other questions? Yes.
I saw you created an API route. Do you think you'll be able to extend it where the user would have options of deciding how they want to fetch that data from?
Oh, it actually does it itself. Yeah. So it can be post, it can be get. Oh, yeah. So can you repeat the question again?
Do you have any plans to allow the user to decide how they want to fetch the data in either server actions or API route like you've
I didn't go that far. So the question is, can we give the users the possibility to fetch the data using maybe server actions? I didn't go that far. And the reason being, a GPT 4.0 really doesn't know how to generate Next.js code post Next.js 14, like 14, 15, it doesn't know how to do it. Like I needed to give it so much context to generate that code. But so I guess like I just need to put, all the documentation around server actions in order to...
Don't use server actions for data fetching. You'll have a bad time.
All right, so we have this ready. Cool. And now let's do test 2. Make sure that it works. We'll give it a 3. Let's refresh this. Yay! Okay. I cheated with all the tests.
Hey, test is going to be disappointing.
Unfortunately, I have no keyboard to give away, so apologies, but I will keep it short. My name is Tony Holdstock-Brown. I work at Inngest, one of the founders, and I'm here to talk about stateful Next.js serverless functions. And that kind of seems like an oxymoron. Stateful serverless functions isn't necessarily a thing. You might question, why does it even matter? That's a really, really good question. I think one of the interesting things is that the bar for product has gotten really high. As I think was it pronounced foul? As you showed, you can build UIs really, really quickly. And Next.js has made it really, really easy to iterate alongside, Vercel with serverless functions. You've got your branching previews, stuff like that. It's really, really hard to build modern products. And it turns out that in backend, it just hasn't really kept up. It would be ideal if you could deploy something like Next.js with your entire serverless functions, your backend, end to end, not just your CRUD stuff, and have everything work with branch deploys, stuff like Neon tied in. And I'll quickly talk about some of the problems and some examples. Right now, it seems as though serverless functions might only be good for CRUD. Not in that feedback is bad, and posting to a database is bad, but if you want to build complex things like Mux's video pipelines, which you shouldn't do, you should just use Mux. You can't really do that in a serverless function. And if you wanted to rebuild all of your indexes from Strapi, say for example for RAG, or you wanted to do embeddings, that sort of stuff is really tough to do in a serverless function because you've got timeouts, it kind of errors, you might have memory issues. It's in general kind of hard. Or if you take something like resend, which under the hood is like, okay, cool, you send emails, but you need to do a lot of complex stuff with timing. The main verification, it turns out, is a little bit of a challenge. You can't do that on a serverless function because DNS is slow. The user might not have updated their DNS settings when they begin clicking the button. It might not propagate it, so you need to do this sort of annoying reschedule flow. You need to add state to your serverless functions in order to make it work. And this is where the sort of Next.js split happens. When you deploy your functions to Next.js, you've got your server routes, you've got your use server, all the fancy stuff they came out with in Next 13, 14, 15, which is cool. But then you've got your backend somewhere else, which kind of sucks. And then what do? You pay extra money to try and sync up your branch deploys, or you try and figure out how to get branch previews working with your backend. And then you try and figure out how to make that work with queuing systems. Doesn't quite work. And the ideal state would be if we can just push all of this state to serverless functions, and you could make your serverless functions work end to end, so you could have one mono repo, build all of your code, ship, and then kind of call it a day. And the idea is, what could we do to make that happen? How is this possible? Some of the complex flows we talked about here, simple steps. You can walk through resends, DNS propagation, and flows as a series of 3 simple steps. And these steps can happen on serverless functions if you inject state, which we'll talk about in a second. Firstly, ping the DNS servers, respond, see if that works. If it didn't work, reschedule the serverless function to run at some other time. You could be smart about it and take the TTLs from the DNS server. Maybe they didn't update that yet, so there's no TTLs. So you do it in like 60 seconds or 2 minutes. It doesn't necessarily matter, but you just reschedule the function to happen. And then once you ping the DNS records, rerun it again, update your internal records. If that failed, which it wouldn't if you're using Neon because they're great. If that fails, great, reschedule the function, retry, and then finally send your notifications to the user to enable the account because, spam is a thing and you don't want that to happen before the DNS records are verified. Relatively simple flow, 3 steps, not hard to do. Each one of them can fail, as we've talked about. And you also have the same thing with another company who does, AI. In this case, they are taking content from Strapi, analyzing your entire website, figuring out what pages you have, what content they look at, figuring out the keywords that they target, and then writing content to talk about those keywords for SEO. And all of those are kind of crazy multi-step pipelines that happen in the background that would be really hard to do on serverless functions unless you had some sort of stateful orchestrator. And that makes everything particularly easy. It turns out that it totally is possible. It's not actually that hard to do. And the answer is workflows, which are essentially step functions. This is an example of said workflow. If you ignore some of the stuff over here with this setup, you can see that there's step.run to get a page content, and then there's step.index page to save to Pinecone or Neon, because PG Vector is great and you shouldn't use two databases. In this case, if the first step fails, we can reschedule the step function, run the step again, because you have state injected into the function. Once this finishes, we save that step run data in some function run state, rerun the function, and inject that data directly into the function on any platform, serverless, so Vercel, or it could be anywhere. And then we skip that step, run the next step. And this allows you to build really composable workflows. If you do step.sleep, for example, if you want to do the DNS propagation thing, you can say, hey, reschedule this function to run in a minute. And then you can start building your entire backend in a really simple, composable way without having to leave Next.js, without having to deploy separate services, which is kind of cool, because if you can do that, you get all of the benefits of Next.js and the environments that you get with the sort of modern toolkits like Vercel. And if you're building these really complex things that do a bunch of AI as steps, which a lot of people do, you can then start testing everything end to end with branch deploys and branch previews. And it's kind of super easy. Don't actually have to change anything. The definition of a workflow, pretty simple. You have function ID is triggered by an event, and super simple to run. In general, kind of like memoization on steroids, really. I don't know if you looked into like memoization and caching, but realistically, cache a step.run, inject that state into the function, and you're kind of good to go. This is super easy. Step.run is a simple API that I think a lot of people will start using. We obviously offer it at Inngest, but I think a lot of people are going to start offering this API in the next couple of years, which is super interesting because hopefully this can become a standard such that it's really easy for you to build simple orchestration without having to worry about queuing systems ever in general. And if you can do that, then largely you've got the front end, which is super easy, the database, which is kind of handled for you. And then everything else that you typically do on the back end can be rolled up into one platform, which is makes development a lot easier. So gives you a bunch out the box, way better system to develop with than having this separate back end, and kind of cool. Yeah. Any questions? Super quick.
What signals are you seeing that you mentioned that this might turn into this kind of pattern? Just from your perspective, what signals are you seeing that make you say this kind of pattern might be adopted through almost like OpenAI's SDK, where it's a pattern everyone uses?
Yeah, totally. So we had the question is, why will this turn into a standard? And what patterns or signals are you seeing that will make this a standard? In order to answer the question, I'll talk just historically real quick, why we built it, how we designed it, and then what we've seen over the last just 2 years. Built it 2 years ago because it was totally necessary to make a bunch of healthcare flows work. Healthcare is crazy. Do not join a healthcare company. If you are in a healthcare company, full respect to you. Very good. We released 2 years ago, and since then, we've seen a bunch of people take step.run and actually run with it. We've seen a bunch of other people from YC take it and run with it, which is cool. We've also seen a bunch of other companies like Netlify try and introduce step.run, which they did at their conference last week. And it is literally our API, which is cool. Cloudflare have also signaled that they want to build the same thing. Obviously, it will be on Cloudflare's system, and it will be using the same API. And so in general, I think the API that we've built will end up becoming a standard that will be on many different clouds, which is super cool. And in general, that should mean, these sorts of systems are the way that we build. Yeah.
Don't forget to repeat the question.
Taking my job, man.
Would you like to compare this to a traditional message queuing system?
Yeah.
Queue or something familiar. I already love it, but just want to.
Yeah. Sure. question is, would you compare this or could you compare it to a traditional messaging system? And this is Next.js. I'll quickly talk about messaging systems overall for the front-end crowd in case people don't know. General event buses, decouples one service to another. Messaging systems are cool, they're good, and they've existed for a bunch of time, but they're sort of commoditized, they're dumb pipes, as it were. If you can build functions that respond to events, number one, send your events over to Inngest or some other platform. Number two, you get fan out, so many serverless functions can run. But if you can build it in a smarter way such that if we take a look at some of these things, the function knows the events and it knows the event name. We can take the types, the schemas, just like you get with Avro and whatnot, and build a schema library. You can also store these events, do flow control. So you can say, you've got a high volume function, sales kind of expensive. Maybe you want to batch 1,000 events into one function call so that you lower your costs. That's super easy, and it's just a batching config in your function. So largely, same decoupling, better developer experience. You can test locally with one command, and it runs anywhere, which is one of the tough parts with serverless. Like, this is kind of why I feel like, I've loved serverless for some time, but it's been hard to develop end to end because it's, CRUD-like. You can't build these complex backends. And so similarities for sure. Very, very, very different use cases. And actually there's a lot layered on top, like batching, debouncing, throttling, concurrency to make it work.
So I assume you invoke these workflows through like a server action. And then is there a way to subscribe to kind of the updates of that function, and how do you manage that?
Yeah. So these are, you send an event over from any particular system. You can like allow or deny list IPs or event names for public keys if you want to send them from the front end, for example, page events. Or if you don't want to do that because security is a thing, server actions. Can you subscribe? Yeah, theoretically. We actually don't do real time right now because, well, largely we see a lot of people building really complex flows. The flows that I've described over here are all largely backend heavy. If you were going to build an API endpoint, you might want to subscribe to that, and that's actually something that we are building now. But right now, it's largely focused on your backend orchestration. But it's totally easy and possible to build. You just want to make sure that things are low latency, things are fast, and security is a thing. Like if you're doing backend orchestration, typically kind of keys to the kingdom. We've got people that do insurance for healthcare, and they run a bunch of insurance flows, and you would not want people to be able to get the output of those results. And so, just making sure that everything is end to end done really nicely is important before rolling it out.
So maybe you don't mind going back to the snippet. I'm curious how close this is to Uber Cadence or other workflow orchestrations, and for example, this page URL. Are you doing things based on where you serialize the closure, and so you're having to have this file be specially kind of imported by Inngest, or are you doing checkpointing at each step?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? So many considerations here, and I'll talk about some of the considerations, and I'll talk about Uber Cadence and how that stuff works. Your considerations of serverless functions are obviously time limits, memory, shutdown, random failures. Your considerations with function state are checkpointing and how to make it as close to exactly once as possible. For people that don't know, Uber Cadence is a system that came out something similar like this, like 2015, 2017. APIs are, you can look at them and see for yourself, but they built a lot of similar things and principles, and respect for them for that. Somewhat similar, event-driven, which is a big difference. One event can trigger one or more functions instead of the RPC start. Because it's event-driven, you can do interesting things like step.wait for event with an expression. And then you can pause your function, whether it's on serverless or Kubernetes or whatever, wait for something specific to happen with a timeout, and then resume the function automatically when that event is received. Or if it times out, the variable will be null, and you know that thing didn't happen. And because it's event-driven, you can do things like look back. So if you've got click cancel, that sort of stuff, no race conditions, basically. Very similar. Yeah, we do checkpointing after each particular step because serverless functions and timeouts are a thing. And the way to sort of manage that is checkpoint after each particular step, rerun the function, and make sure that it starts anew. although there's different modes of running, such that, you can just automatically run down, which reduces latency, but obviously in serverless functions may not be what you want.
So you memorize the steps and don't rely on like serializing the closure then?
No, we memorize the steps. And this is something interesting as well. Like, if you're going to build these workflows, which I think over the next 5 years will become super common, you're going to end up changing them over time. And I don't know how many people here have worked with queuing systems or built some complex stuff in the back end, and they realize that, fuck, we need to change this code, and this code has already been enqueued like 1 million times, and like, how are we actually going to make this work? That is no fun. Versioning and this sort of thing is kind of weird. You can see that we add step.run, and there's an ID, which is get page content. Each particular ID is hashed with an index, which is the number of times you've seen that ID. And that becomes the hash key for the function state. So if you want to change things, it's super easy to change the ID, and it will rerun, and it will rerun that step. It also means you can do steps in a loop without doing your own identifiers or counts, because, we store the counts for you. And then it means if you reorder things, technically you can do one of two things. You can store the entire stack, which is the order in which you saw every hash. Or you can just do a straight lookup and say, you know what, you reordered it. You're in like lax mode. I don't know if people remember useStrict back in the day with JavaScript. Like, why don't we just throw that in here and then you get your own sort of stuff, This format and this API is, I guess, like one of the principles that you learn in engineering is like explicit versus implicit. This is extremely explicit to the point where I think that's why people are taking this and running with it overall. And it's much simpler to reason about.
So like, maybe I missed something, but why doesn't this time out? Are you rerunning this?
Yeah. The question is, why wouldn't this time out? And are you rerunning this? So yeah, in between each step.run, function state is memoized, cached, re-injected into the function, and reran. And that means that each particular step gets its own timeouts by default. And that is easy. Obviously, if you've got the 900-second timeout on the cell, you still have to abide by those laws. The same with like Lambda, you got your 15-minute stuff. That is sort of a definition, a defining feature of serverless functions overall. Google Cloud Run, I think, is 1 or 2 hours, which is kind of crazy. They're actually pretty cool. If you want to do serverless functions, that is kind of, this runs on your platform. So you get your own platform restrictions. We just rerun the function on every step.
Okay, so you just, like, I don't quite understand exactly how that works, but I
Yeah. Orchestration, we call your function when it needs to be called. And after a step.run runs, it sends us back the data. Function terminates due to magic that we've got in our SDK. And then it schedules another function call with the updated state to hit that function. It sees the updated state, skips the previous steps, and hops straight to where it needs to be.
get it.
Yeah.
Because it's memoized.
Yeah.
So is just serverless functions timing out just like a fact of life? I mean, is it
Yeah, I mean,
have that be a thing?
It would, yeah, I mean, like, it would be to a degree nice if you did that, but then I guess your questions are like, ECS is a thing. It's probably more cost effective to pay for ECS than it is to pay for a bunch of functions running. Functions do timeout, platform specifics. We take the stance of we don't ever want to run your code because security is a thing. Come from a healthcare background. I don't want you to poke holes in your VPC to give us database credentials or that sort of stuff. You figure out where you want it to run, whether it's like bare metal or whatnot, and it'll run. Serverless function timeouts, though, yeah, I don't know why the cell has such a small timeout. That frustrates me.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have the usual APIs like, if you want to do a Stripe trial, like wait 14 days and then like...
Yeah. Wait 14 days, wait for event. Wait for event is cool because then you don't need to use like any crazy signals. You don't need to record any state. You can do automatic cancellation by configuring cancel on with an event as well. So if you're building some sort of AI flow and the user hits cancel, send an event that says it was canceled. Your functions will automatically terminate. The similar APIs, just ergonomic because it should be easy for people to use in general.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thank you so much.